Question. Dear Mr. Michaels, what do you think and what do the Ascended Masters think about other higher races on this planet? There seems to be a lot of evidence for that, lots of reports of contact, also potential evidence from our faraway past. These stories may often contain a certain amount of confabulation, maybe wishful thinking or even deliberate misinformation. Also, our human limits of understanding may play a huge role. Yet it seems to be quite certain that there are several races active here, some of them more highly developed than us, and some of them much higher developed. All of them with psi-abilities, psychic abilities, all of them operating partly or even mostly outside of the boundaries of our materialistic mainstream paradigm. Some may have exploitative and malevolent intentions towards us, like the infamous Greys perhaps. Some of them may be more neutral towards us. Are the Ascended Masters in contact with some or all of these races? Does it somewhat, in human terms, make sense what is going on there? Or is it all divergent interests, complicated and confusing, going above our heads completely? Yeah, well, I have in several videos touched upon similar topics because I've talked about UFOs, I talked about channelers who get contradictory messages. So what I explain is, if you take my video about how the world was created, you get sort of better background for understanding what I'm going to say here, but I'll give a brief summary. So what I've explained is that we live in a world that's made out of energy. And energy is vibration. There's different levels of vibration. We know this. There's visible light, there's ultraviolet light, there's infrared. So what I've explained is that the world, the physical material universe, actually has four parts or four spectra of vibration. So the lowest is the physical level where our physical bodies are. But above that is the emotional level, the mental level, and the identity level. And beyond those four is, of course, the spiritual realm, which is even higher vibrations. So what I have explained is that we are the self-aware beings living in the physical realm. So there aren't in the physical realm other races. There are animals, of course, but animals and humans. There's not in the physical realm any other race. But in the emotional, mental, and identity realms, there are beings. They are not in physical bodies. They are in bodies that are not as dense. So, the physical bodies are the most dense. In the emotional level, there are beings that have bodies that are identity, mental, and emotional. Ours are all four. In the mental realm, there are beings that have identity and mental, and in the identity realm, there are beings that only have identity bodies. And there, in the mental realm, for example, there are some vast worlds there. There are many of these beings that have created all kinds of worlds there. And there are certainly beings over time who are tied into this mentally. And in the emotional realm, there's also beings there, and there are worlds there. And some of the lower aspects of the identity realm is what people have seen as hell. They are also sometimes called the astral plane. And so, beings at all of these three higher levels that from our perspective can seem to be more evolved than we are because they have certain abilities that we don't or that we haven't activated. So psychic abilities or ability to mentally travel otherwhere or communicate with telepathy. Our physical bodies are so dense that for most people it blocks these kind of abilities. There are, of course, people who have developed them. But for most people, we are confined to our physical senses. But in the emotional realm, for example, they don't have as dense bodies, so they have abilities beyond what we have and even more in the mental and identity realm. So what I've also explained is that the core of your being is what I call the conscious you. So in other words, you have these four lower bodies, the identity, mental, and emotional, and physical, And there's where your outer personality is, what I call these subconscious selves. But the core of your being is the conscious you, which is normally experiencing the world through the outer personality, these 4 levels. But you have the ability to step outside of it. And when you step outside of these 4 lower bodies, or you can connect to other levels. So let's say you have the ability to step outside of your physical body. So you can tune into the emotional realm, but you can't go higher. If you are a little more evolved, you can step outside of the physical and the emotional and go to the mental. If you're more evolved, you can go outside physical, emotional, mental, and go to the identity realm. And if you're even more involved, you can go beyond all 4 and contact the spiritual realm. So there are, throughout the ages, there are of course people who have made contact with, let's say, beings in the mental realm. There are channels out there who are in contact with beings in the mental realm, channeling these beings. And they present themselves in various ways. Sometimes they say they might be a higher race that live in a more advanced civilization somewhere, but still associated with Earth. Sometimes they present themselves as coming from different planets or different star systems. So there are all kinds of scenarios out there. And you can say, is it real? And yeah, it's real in the sense that it has this temporary existence in these levels. Just as I explained in my video about how the world was created, we live in an unascended sphere. Nothing here is permanent. So even the physical is not permanent. But there are beings in these emotional mental identity level that have created certain worlds, and they have a certain temporary reality. But what you can ask is, as the question also talks about, some of them could be exploitative and malevolent, have malevolent intentions towards us. And this is because many of these beings, not all of them, but many of these beings have also gone into what I call the consciousness of separation, which means they are cut off from the spiritual realm. They're not receiving energy, or at least not very much, from the spiritual realm. As I also explained, most people are only receiving a minimal amount of energy from their higher selves, just enough to keep them alive and conscious. So there are the beings in these 3 realms that have cut themselves off because they've gone into duality, they've gone into a selfish state of consciousness. So they need to get energy from the level they are at or lower level. And this means that some of these beings are trying to make contact with humans, they're even trying to channel or whatever, in order to get people's energy. So yes, that, in my view, that's exploitative, especially when people don't know what's going on. You could say that if you have contact with a being in the mental realm that presents itself as a god, and you believe this and you are willingly worshipping this god, thinking you will get something out of it, then yeah, maybe you are voluntarily worshipping this god, but if you understood that this isn't a real god that can't do something for you, would you do it? So it is certainly deceptive. And so the question is, are the Ascended Masters in contact with some or all of these races? And as I said, they're not in contact with all of them, because those who, when you go into separation, you cut yourself off from the Ascended Masters. It's not that the Ascended Masters would hold the contact. You just, in your mind, you can't make the contact. But there are, as I said, there are beings in these realms that are working with the Ascended Masters, and they are not necessarily malevolent or exploitative. But so there are some beings that the Masters are in contact with and are working with, because you understand that part of the role of Ascended Masters is to release a stream of spiritual energy that is filtered down in vibration, that is lowered in vibration. And so the Masters lower it to the level of the identity realm. There are beings in the identity realm they lower the energy to the level of the mental realm, and there are beings in the mental realm lower it to the emotional beings, and emotional lowering it to the physical. So the masters are working with those, they're giving them energy, which is upholding creation. It's even upholding the material realm. I mean, the material realm couldn't exist if there wasn't this stream of energy, and that stream is facilitated by these beings. They're sometimes called elemental beings, or devas, or angels. They've been called different things over time. But as I said, many of these beings the masters are not in contact with. Does it somewhat make sense what's going on here, or on there? Well, yes, it makes sense in the sense that planet Earth is a schoolroom, and as I have explained in many of my videos, it's an unnatural planet. So this means it's now it's a schoolroom primarily for beings who have gone into duality. And there are beings both at the identity, mental, emotional, and physical level who are in duality. And so it makes sense that they are allowed to outplay the duality consciousness, because as I talk about the school of hard knocks, there's a school of higher awareness where you're connected to the ascended masters, you are seeking to raise your awareness. Then there's a school of hard knocks, which is separation. And the separation you only learn by the hard knocks, which means you see the consequences of your own actions. So we who are in physical embodiment, we experience physical consequences of our actions. And we can't deny them, because, you know, if you knock your head against a concrete wall and it hurts, it's pretty undeniable. And the same thing in the emotional mental identity, they experience consequences at their level that are harder to deny. Now, at the higher levels, it's easier to deny things and explain things away, and that's why it can be very confusing for those people who make contact with such beings, because they are, in a sense, as the question also says, they have abilities beyond ours, but they're still in duality. And in duality, you can argue for or against any viewpoint, and that means that people in physical embodiment who make contact with these beings, they can become very, very confused. And I've seen this happen to people who follow some of these channelings from the mental realm, for example. The mental realm the intellect can argue for or against any viewpoint, and some people end up becoming very, very confused, because you really don't know what's true or false. And it can be, you can't get out of it through the intellect, through analyzing, reasoning. The only way out is, as I explained in many of my videos, to contact the Christ mind, and therefore re-establish contact with the ascended masters and with your higher self. Then you can gradually overcome these illusions. Because, let's put it this way, I explain in many of my videos, in our subconscious minds we have these structures, the subconscious selves, and they're based on an illusion. And so you have a self, for example, that's based on a particular illusion in the mental realm. And this is what gives these beings in the mental realm an inroad into your consciousness. They can pull on you, pull on your attention, they can confuse you, they can steal your energy through this. The same in the emotional and identity, of course. So you can say it's all part of the learning process in a sense. It doesn't mean that the ascended masters have created this or that they wanted us. But what I'm saying is, once you go into duality, you're in the school of hard knocks, and it's really just a matter of you have to take duality so far into an extreme that you cry out for help. You say, I can't do this anymore, I don't want to do this anymore, there must be a better way to live. And that's when the masters are then allowed to give you something that can help you go to the next level up. And the question says, or is it all divergent interests, complicated and confusing, going above our heads completely? And as I said, you can, when you have ascended master teachings, take my video about how the world was created, you can make some sense of what's going on. But, of course, if you open your mind to the emotional realm, it will be very complicated and confusing. And you can be overwhelmed by feelings, you can be pulled into all kinds of depression, behavior, negative feelings, anger. And the same thing if you tune into beings in the mental realm, you can be very easily confused intellectually. And if you tune into the beings in the identity realm, you can especially be very, very confused, and you can feel like it's completely beyond your head. So you can understand what's going on and why, but if you try to tune in to a specific level and try to make sense of it there, you can't, because at that level, for example, the mental level, there are many different groups of these beings that have their own agendas. And maybe they have an agenda of stealing energy from people or making themselves seem very sophisticated. And maybe some of these groups are in competition with each other. So if you try to go in at that level and look at it and make sense of it, you just end up being totally confused. And that's why my approach is simply this. I don't want to have anything to do with these levels. I'm only interested in the Ascended Masters. Because the Ascended Masters have ascended because they have transcended self-interest. They have transcended separation and duality. They don't need energy from us. They're not trying to manipulate us. And that's what I want to make contact with. And that's what I've spent my whole life purifying my consciousness from these separate selves that pulls you into the other levels, so I can make contact with the Ascended Masters and maintain that neutral state of mind that really is the key to that, having that contact. And many other people have, of course, their own intuitive contact with the Masters, and to me that's the goal of the spiritual path. And that's why I'm saying, you know, to me, it's important for me to know that there are these levels. It's important for me to understand the dynamic there. But as far as the specifics of what's going on there, I just have no interest in it. And I actually think it's potentially very confusing and dangerous to delve into it. And I have certainly seen people who had very negative effects of tying themselves to, for example, the emotional level or the mental. And so I think for a spiritual student, it's much more constructive just bypass the whole thing and reach up for the Ascended Masters, who are the universal spiritual teachers of humankind.